This stage in a parliament, with the polls looking as they are, would a rational Prime Minister be considering an election right now?
Perhaps. That's what I would say. Is it the most likely option? I definitely don't think so. But is it something that perhaps the Prime Minister is considering? Quite possibly. Why? Well, the problem that the Prime Minister has is a question of what is the best time to get re-elected. When will he have the greatest chance of re-election? And it may be, and I do stress may, it may be the case that the Prime Minister looks at some internal data, looks at what's ahead with regards to things like the cost of living crisis, perhaps the summer of discontent that may or may not be taking place, and he might be thinking to himself, actually, the greatest chance I stand of being elected is not in a year or 2 years' time, but it's probably now, or at least in the autumn. And so he's thinking to himself, yes, at the moment the polls point to, if there were a general election tomorrow, Labour would probably be able to oust the Conservatives from Downing Street, even if they themselves didn't get a majority. And so he's thinking, OK, a campaign, could that bring more votes in? He's probably thinking, yes, that would mean a smaller majority, but an extra 2 years. Could that be more important? These are all considerations that are playing out. But I imagine that it's more sort of speculation and wargaming rather than actual reality. And, of course, it's convenient for the government always to keep the opposition on their toes as to the precise timing of an election.
And I suppose also, not just the opposition on their toes, but his own MPs. Could this be perhaps a piece of party management, trying to keep MPs in line, not getting those rebellious MPs to sort of score own goals against the leadership, just in case an election might take place?
It could well be that, but that's a difficult political tightrope to walk. To say to your allies, at least in inverted commas, we're doing so badly that I'm going to call an election so that you will lose your job, is not great for discipline. But you're right that ultimately, what do all of these MPs want? They want to keep their seats. And so a lot of the calculation around Conservative leadership, for instance, is the idea of, is Boris Johnson the best person to lead the Conservatives into the next election? A lot of MPs will be thinking about that.
And I suppose one of the reasons why he is still there, despite a great deal of discontent, 40% of his own MPs voting against him, is because they can't decide anyone else who might be a better frontman for the Conservative Party right now. I want to look at the state of the polls, though, because the Labour Party is certainly ahead of the Conservative Party. Different pollsters have it by different amounts, but it's not double digits ahead. It's not storming ahead in the way that you might expect, given the scandal that has beset this government. Why is the Labour Party not doing better, and should it be?
Well, there's a whole host of different reasons for the question about why it's not doing better. Essentially, since the local elections, the polls haven't really moved very much. And you're right that depending on which pollster you look for, it varies in terms of Labour lead. But I think what it comes down to is the fact that there are some people who previously were willing to vote Labour, then moved over to the Conservatives, and now they are choosing to often sit on their hands and decide not to vote, but they haven't yet been won back to Labour. And that's a crucial challenge that Keir Starmer faces, and at least part of the reason why Labour continues to not have the kind of lead that perhaps Tony Blair might have had against John Major during similar circumstances.
And it's interesting, looking at different pollsters, the lead is different. For example, the Opinium polling organisation weight the don't knows in a different way to other ones, and that makes the Labour leader very much smaller, sometimes only 3 points, sort of margin of error stuff, whereas others weight don't knows in terms of how they might turn out in a slightly more pessimistic way for the government. This can really matter because, of course, polls are a snapshot rather than a prediction.
And that's right. And, I mean, how long have you got to explain polling methodology? But in very simple terms, which hopefully people can understand, what Opinion are doing is reallocating people who say that they don't know who they're going to vote for at the moment based on their previous behaviour and their demographics, on the assumption that when there is an election, they will vote in a particular way. And now that is a big assumption that other pollsters don't follow, and it's more towards a prediction than a snapshot. And so that's why there's the difference. There's no evidence that it's necessarily more accurate. We will have to see when the election takes place, in the autumn, or next year, or the year after.
And just finally, in our final 20 seconds, if you were a betting person, who is best placed to win that election were it to take place this year? Can campaigns, and can Boris Johnson in a campaigning mode, take it back for the government?
He can. Will he? I think the most likely outcome, if it really were to happen, and there's no guarantee this would be the case, the most likely outcome would be Keir Starmer in Downing Street. Now, whether that is characterised by a Labour victory or simply a Conservative failure remains to be seen.
Likely a messy hung parliament there.